This is Sebastian and Victor's screencast, and we have chosen the text, what we talk about when we talk about love. First of all, Sebastian, he will begin by giving a summary of the texts, and then I will talk about the setting. Later we will talk about the persons, the theme, the language, and at last the writer's intention.
In the short story, what we talk about when we talk about love, different definitions of love, true meaning, are explored by the characters. As the sun slowly comes down below the horizon, the couple Nick and Laura, a newly married couple, listen to their older friends, Mel and Terry, discuss about relationships and the meaning of love. As the two couples grow increasingly intoxicated, the conversation moves in many different directions. And then the discussion about the meaning of love clearly begins. But this story also gives a view on how a big role love plays in a relationship, and also shows how different people's definition of love and opinion are about what real love are, and what leads to real love and a healthy relationship.
The story takes place at Mel and Terry McGinn's place. The setting is fairly neutral and only provides the opportunity for the two couples to have a deep conversation over the kitchen table, which they also never leave in the story. Apart from that, the light is also an important part of the setting, because it changes as the story moves forward. In the beginning, the light fills the kitchen and the conversation between the two couples is good and there is a positive vibe in the room. In the end, the sunlight is gone and the conversation is very serious and the vibe is tense in the kitchen. Next, we will talk about the characters, and I will start by talking about Mel and Terry. Mel is a 45 years old man who is married with Terry. Apart from that, he has 2 children with his ex-wife. He is a cardiologist, which is a heart doctor, and in the story he's also described as being very tall, rangy, and with curly hair. Throughout the story he also drinks quite a lot, and he also talks the most. He has some strong arguments against Terry's ex-boyfriend Ed, who Mel thinks was a psychopath. Terry is married with Mel, and she has a very different idea of what love is compared with Mel. In the story she also refers to his boyfriend Ed, who loved her so much that he almost killed himself. It's like Terry seems flattered by that fact, and therefore she also possibly thinks that her love with Mel is a bit tedious. And then Sebastian, he will talk about Nick and Laura.
Nick is the narrator of the story. He doesn't say much, but the observations he makes are the key for revealing what love means to the 4 friends around the table. Nick and his wife Laura met at work, but Nick never says exactly what he does for a living. He's 38 and has been with Laura for around 18 months. He doesn't say much in the story, but the observations he makes about, for example, the changing light, the amount of gin, and the sound of breathing hearts give the story its rhythm. Laura is Nick's wife. Laura is 35, is a legal secretary. She barely speaks at all in the story, other than to say that she and Nick understand love, and at the end she says she's hungry. But her tender physical communication with Nick, for example by holding hands, touching knees, gives a view on what love means to her. The theme of this short story is the meaning of love, or the definition of the meaning of love. We don't get to know the meaning of love despite the character's best efforts to define it. Especially Mel tries again and again to identify the meaning of love, or gives a definition of the meaning of love with a bunch of examples, but it never comes down to a clear conclusion. For example, he tells his friends about an elderly couple who nearly died in a car crash, but he concludes the story very strange, and this makes it very confusing for the other characters. By just saying the old man got depressed by not being able to see his wife, and that end of the story just makes the other characters very confused. As said before, they all gives their point of view on the meaning of love, but they never quite figure it out despite all the inputs and definition, and this makes the theme very hard to find a theme to this story. But as said before, we think that because of all the characters' meanings about and opinions about love and how to achieve a healthy relationship, makes the meaning of love quite good for the theme of this short story. Next up, Victor will talk about the language.
Yes, and now I will give a comment on the language and talk about the writer's intention. The sentences in the story, they are quite short, and there are many dots and therefore many hold-ups. As we see on the first page, in the first and second line, my friend Mel McGinnis was talking. Mel McGinnis is a cardiologist, and sometimes that gives him the right. And as you can hear, there are many hold-ups and many dots. If you look at the page. Apart from that, there is a lot of dialogue in the text, and therefore there is a lot of use of everyday language. Yes, and now the writer's intention. The writer's intention is that it is impossible to define love, as we hear in the story, because none of them agree on what love is. Especially Mill and Terry disagree. Furthermore, that love has many faces, and it is expressed in many ways, as we hear in the story, where Terry refers to Ed, who almost killed himself. Apart from that, the text also focuses on the diversity between people, because we think that none of the persons in the text expected that they would disagree so much over the topic of love. And the point is there that it's only when we open up and talk freely that we really experience that diversity between the people we sit in the same room with. At last, we think that Raymond Carver's story, what we talk about when we talk about love, is good, and that is mainly because that his main point, that love is impossible to define, is relevant, because we also think that it is something that you can't define, and something that is really different, and is very subjective, as we also hear in the story. So in total, it's a really good story.